It was a calm afternoon when I returned home from college, stepping through the familiar doorway that held years of childhood memories. Yet something felt different, quieter yet somehow warmer. My 19-year-old stepbrother, Ryan, greeted me with an easygoing smile, casually tossing a soccer ball between his hands. He looked taller, more mature than I remembered. "Hey," he said. "Hey," I replied, caught off guard by how much he had changed. Our parents had left that morning for a weekend getaway, leaving just the two of us in the house. We had never been particularly close growing up. I was 3 years older, and our lives had rarely overlapped. But that afternoon something shifted. As I unpacked, there was a knock at my door. "Want to order pizza later?" Ryan asked. I agreed, and soon we were sitting in the living room, sharing slices while flipping through TV channels. Conversation flowed more naturally than I expected. We laughed about old family memories, like the time we built a fort out of bed sheets and got in trouble for knocking over a lamp. "You were such a troublemaker," I teased. "And you were bossy," he shot back with a grin. The banter felt effortless, as if no time had passed at all. Later that evening, I found Ryan in the kitchen washing dishes. "I got it," I said, stepping up beside him. "Nah, you're the guest now," he joked, but I grabbed a towel anyway. As we cleaned, we talked about his plans for college. He spoke passionately about wanting to be an engineer, designing things that could change lives. His determination surprised me. "I never knew you were so ambitious," I admitted. He shrugged. "Guess you were always too busy to notice." The comment wasn't meant to sting, but it did. Just a little. It was a quiet reminder of how much he had grown while I was away. The next morning, I woke to find Ryan outside working on his car, sleeves rolled up, hands covered in grease. He looked focused, determined. I watched for a moment, taken aback by how capable he seemed. "You just gonna stand there and stare?" he called out, catching me. I laughed and joined him. For the next hour, he patiently explained how the engine worked, showing me parts one didn't understand. I nodded along, impressed not just by his knowledge, but by the way he took the time to explain things to me. That evening, a storm rolled in, knocking out the power. We lit candles and played cards at the kitchen table, the rain tapping against the windows. In the warm glow of candlelight, the house felt safe, almost cozy. "I'm glad you're here," Ryan said suddenly, his voice softer than usual. "Me too," I admitted. For the first time in years, I felt like I truly knew him, not just as my stepbrother, but as someone who cared, who listened, who had grown into a person I genuinely admired. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was comfortable. As thunder rumbled outside, I realized how grateful I was for this unexpected chance to reconnect. The next morning, I walked into the kitchen and found Ryan making breakfast. "Since when do you cook?" I asked, grabbing a plate. "Since someone had to," he said with a shrug. "Figured I'd get good at it." We ate together, and for once, it didn't feel like small talk. Ryan asked about my plans now that I was done with college. I hesitated before admitting, "I don't know yet." I'd spent so much time chasing a degree that I hadn't thought about what came next. "You'll figure it out," he said confidently. "You've always been stubborn enough to make things happen." His words stuck with me. He believed in me, maybe even more than I believed in myself. That afternoon we tackled some chores together. Ryan insisted on doing most of the work, but I stayed close, finding an unexpected comfort in our unspoken rhythm. Somewhere between folding laundry and sweeping the patio, the conversation turned to relationships. "You still with that guy?" Ryan asked carefully. I shook my head. "Didn't work out." He didn't press for details, but I could tell he wanted to. Instead, he just nodded. "His loss," he said simply. And for some reason that meant more to me than any advice could have. That evening, we settled in to watch one of those old action movies Dad used to love. I noticed Ryan glancing at me throughout, like he had something on his mind. When the credits rolled, he finally spoke. "I remember when you left for college," he said quietly. I don't know. I guess I thought you'd forget about me." I turned to him, surprised. "Forget about you? You were always busy," he said. Friends, classes. I figured you'd move on and we'd just drift apart. A pang of guilt hit me. I'd never thought about it from his perspective before. I had been so wrapped up in my own world that I hadn't noticed how much distance had formed between us. I didn't forget, I said softly. I guess I didn't know how to stay close. He smiled a little. Well, you're here now. Such a simple statement, yet it felt so important, like no matter what had happened in the past, he still believed in us, in the bond we had always shared. Later that night, I found a small note left on my desk. Glad you're home. It was from Ryan. And for the first time in a long time I felt like I truly was. I smiled to myself, carefully folding the note. For the first time in a long while I felt like I truly belonged. Not just as part of the family, but as someone Ryan genuinely cared about. And I realized, cared just as much. The next day felt different. Quieter. Almost tense. Ryan barely spoke during breakfast, seeming distant. His mind somewhere else. I figured he just needed space, but something felt off. By the afternoon, he was still withdrawn. I found him sitting on the porch, phone in hand, staring at the screen. Everything okay? Asked. He hesitated, then shook his head. Just some stuff with school. Nothing big. I knew it wasn't nothing. After some gentle pushing, he finally admitted the truth. He had missed a project deadline, and now his scholarship was at risk. I should have handled it better, he muttered, frustration lacing his voice. But now I'm stuck. You're not stuck, I said. You're just overwhelmed. He scoffed. I can't fix it. You might not be able to fix everything at once, I said carefully. But you can start somewhere. Ryan didn't respond, but I could tell he was listening. That evening I set my laptop on the table and started typing. Ryan walked past and frowned. What are you doing? Helping you, I said. If you're going to give up, at least let me try first. He didn't argue. Instead, he sat beside me and together we spent hours rewriting sections of his project, tightening ideas, filling gaps, finding ways to improve it. The more we worked, the more his confidence grew. Soon he was leading the way, explaining concepts I barely understood. By the time we finished, his frustration had faded, replaced by something quieter. Relief. Maybe even pride. Couldn't have done it without you, he admitted. You did most of it, I reminded him. Yeah, but you didn't let me quit. That night I found myself thinking about how much he had changed. The restless, stubborn kid I remembered had grown into someone who worked hard, cared deeply, and refused to back down, even when things felt impossible. The next morning I found him pacing the kitchen. Nervous? Yes. Yeah, he admitted. But I'll figure it out. Smiled. I know you will. He grinned back, and in that moment I realized something important. Ryan wasn't just my stepbrother. He was someone I truly admired. Someone who made me want to be better, too. When Ryan's project was accepted, I saw the weight lift off his shoulders. He tried to play it cool, but I knew how much it meant to him. That night he seemed lighter, like he could finally breathe again. I owe you, he said. You don't, I replied. You just needed someone to remind you what you're capable of. For the rest of the evening, everything felt easy again. Relaxed, normal. I thought whatever tension had been there was gone. I was wrong. The next morning, Ryan was unusually quiet again. He barely touched his breakfast, stirring his cereal in slow, absent-minded circles. Something wrong? Yes. It's nothing, he muttered. But later, as I passed by his room, I overheard him on the phone. I don't know, he said. It's complicated. I didn't ask what he meant, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it had something to do with me. That evening we sat on the couch watching TV, but the air between us felt heavy. Finally I turned to him. Did I do something? He blinked, caught off guard. What? You've been weird all day, I said. If I upset you. You didn't, he cut in quickly. Then he hesitated, like he wasn't sure how to say what was on his mind. I guess I just didn't expect this. Expect what? This. He gestured vaguely between us. Hanging out. Talking. actually getting along. I almost laughed, but he wasn't joking. I didn't expect it either, I admitted. But I'm glad we did. His expression softened, and for a second, something unspoken hung between us, something neither of us was quite ready to say out loud. "You're leaving soon, right?" he asked. "Yeah," I said quietly. "In a few days." Ryan nodded slowly, like he was still processing it. "I know we didn't always get along," I said. "But I'm proud of you, Ryan." He looked at me surprised. "Really?" "Yeah, you've changed a lot. In a good way." For a moment he didn't answer. Then he smiled. Not his usual sarcastic grin, but something genuine. "I'm proud of you too," he said. "You always act like you're still figuring things out, but you've got it together more than you think." The words caught me off guard. But I believed him. The day I left, Ryan walked me to my car. He stood there, shifting his weight like he wanted to say something more. "You're gonna be okay," I told him. "I know you are." "You too," he replied. Before I could get in, he reached out and hugged me. Quick, almost hesitant. "Don't wait so long to visit next time," he muttered. Smiled. "I won't." As I drove away, I realized something important. We hadn't just reconnected. We had built something stronger. And no matter where life took us, I knew that bond would always be there.